My name is Della Crane. I'm 49 years old, and for the last 7 years I was the one who drove out to my grandmother's farmhouse on Whitcomb Road every other day to fill her pill organizer, to weed the lavender beds she could no longer kneel in, and to sit with her on the wraparound porch while the sun went down over fields that had been in our family for 4 generations. The night they auctioned off her house, I stood at the back of the barn in my work coat and watched a man with a microphone sell my grandmother's dining table, the one she'd eaten Thanksgiving at for 60 years, for $90. My brother Marcus saw me by the door and walked over, grinning, a beer in his hand. "You came," he said. "Good. Mom was worried you'd make a scene." He clapped my shoulder. "Don't. Sign where Uncle Glenn tells you. Take your little cut and let the grown-ups handle the rest." What Marcus didn't know was that 2 years before she died, my grandmother had taken me to a small office in town that smelled of old coffee and signed a single sheet of paper with a county clerk's stamp on it. He didn't know that the auctioneer could sell every plate and every chair in that barn, and it would all be void the moment the real owner refused to sign. He thought I was there to take my cut. I was there because the house was already mine, and nobody in my family had bothered to check. Before I tell you what happened when they finally needed my signature, do me one small favor: hit like and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know. And drop your town and the time where you're watching in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Let me take you back to the first summer I started driving out to Whitcomb Road. My grandmother, Ruth Whitcomb, was born in the farmhouse she died in. She raised 4 children there, buried a husband from its front parlor, and by the time she was 86 and I was 42, she was the last of her generation still standing, sharp as a tack and twice as stubborn. There were a lot of us in line for what Ruth left behind. My mother, Patricia, was the oldest, the one who'd moved to the city, married well, and spent every holiday talking about the farm's potential the way other people talk about the weather. My Uncle Glenn ran a car dealership 2 counties over and never met a thing he couldn't put a price tag on. And then there were the grandchildren, my brother Marcus, the golden one, a regional sales manager with a boat and a story about a deal that almost closed. My cousins, who called Ruth on her birthday and at Christmas. And then there was me, the divorced one, the medical biller who rented a duplex in town and drove a 15-year-old Tahoe. In our family, your worth was measured by what you'd made of yourself, and what I'd made, in my mother's eyes, was a series of disappointments she narrated to the rest of the family with a sigh. My mother had a way of putting me in my place without raising her voice. When I told the family my marriage had ended, she set down her fork at Easter dinner and said, to the table, "Well?" Della never did finish anything she started. Then she asked Marcus how the boat was running. The boat got the rest of dinner. My divorce got a sigh. I learned a long time ago to do the dishes without being asked, and to keep my own needs small enough to carry quietly out the door. So, when Grandma Ruth's neighbor called one June evening to say Ruth had left the stove burner on overnight and the kitchen had filled with gas, I didn't call a family meeting. I didn't post about it. I just got in the Tahoe and started driving out to Whitcomb Road. The every other days became every day. Nobody else offered. My mother said the drive was too far and her back wouldn't take it. Uncle Glenn said he'd look into a facility. Marcus sent Ruth a fruit basket with a card that spelled her name wrong. The porch is where Grandma Ruth and I actually talked. She'd sit in the rocker my grandfather built, a quilt over her knees even in July, and I'd snap green beans into a colander, and she'd tell me things she never told her own children. How she'd run the whole farm alone for 2 years while my grandfather was overseas. How she'd nearly lost the place to the bank in 1981 and saved it by selling her mother's wedding silver and never telling a soul. How she'd learned, the hard way, the difference between people who love you and people who are waiting on you. "You know what's wrong with this family, Della," she said one evening, the light going copper across the soybean fields. "They've been measuring this land in dollars since before your grandfather was cold. Your mother brought a realtor to my 80th birthday. A realtor to my party." She shook her head. You're the only one who ever asked if the gutters needed cleaning before you asked what the place might fetch. I told her not to talk like that. I told her the family loved her. She just patted my hand, her skin thin as the pages of her Bible. There's a difference between being loved and being inventory. 2 years before she died, on a Tuesday in October, Ruth asked me to drive her into town. Not to the doctor, to a lawyer's office above the hardware store. She made me wait in the truck for the first 20 minutes, then sent the receptionist out to bring me in. There was a paper on the desk and a county clerk's stamp drying on it, and Ruth signed her name in the shaky cursive I'd have known anywhere, and then she pointed at the line beneath hers and said, "Now you." I signed without fully understanding what it was. Some afternoons, when I think back, I can still smell the old coffee in that office. On the way home, she patted my knee and said, "There. Now nobody can do to you what they did to my sister when our mother passed. You won't have to ask anyone's permission to keep what's yours." I thought she was just being sentimental. An old woman, tidying up. She wasn't. Over the next 7 years, I kept records. Not because I was planning anything, because I do medical billing for a living, and you do not last 20 years in billing by throwing away documentation. I have a folder. Into it went the receipts for the prescriptions I covered the months Ruth's Social Security ran short. The mileage I logged out of pure habit and never billed to anyone. The $400 invoice from the day the well pump died, which I paid and never mentioned. The text from my mother in year 4. "Can you deal with Grandma's Medicare mess? You're the one who likes that tedious stuff." The text from Marcus in year 6, the only one he ever sent me about Ruth. "Hey, is the farm still in her name? Glenn says the acreage alone could go for real money." I didn't keep these to build a case. I kept them because, somewhere around the 3rd year, I understood that I was the only person in this family writing anything down because I was the only one who was ever there. The hardest one to file came that Thanksgiving. I'd driven Ruth to my mother's for the meal, bundled her up, brought her good chair, made her plate the way she liked it, turkey and no marshmallows on the sweet potatoes because they hurt her dentures. In the kitchen, scraping plates, I heard my mother tell my Aunt Carol, in the easy voice people use for things they've said many times, "Oh, Della practically lives out there now." It's good for her, honestly. Gives her something to do. It's not like she's got a life otherwise. Something to do, like a puzzle, like a hobby to fill the hours of a woman no man had wanted to keep. 7 years of gas leaks caught at 2A. And falls in the bathroom, and learning which cough meant nothing and which meant the ER by sunrise. And to her, it was something to do. Later, in the truck, Ruth took my hand in the dark. Her grip was still surprisingly firm. "I hear how they talk about you," she said. "I want you to know I see you. I always have. Don't you ever let them tell you otherwise. If you've ever been the one who shows up and never gets thanked for it, the one they say has nothing better to do, tell me in the comments. I read every single one." About 4 months before she died, Ruth's heart began to fail, and a woman I'd never met started coming out to the farmhouse. Diane Halverson. Estate attorney, late 50s, gray bob, the kind of reading glasses that hang on a chain. She'd come some afternoons while I was there and sit with Ruth at the kitchen table over a folder I was never shown. The first time, I rose to give them privacy. Ruth waved me back into my chair. "Stay. You'll be glad you stayed." Once, carrying their cups to the sink, I caught the word on the folder's tab, a single line in Ruth's blocky hand. "Deed recorded." I didn't know what it meant. I didn't ask. I had a pill organizer to fill and a prescription to pick up before the pharmacy in town closed at 6. The last week, when Ruth could barely get a sentence out, Diane caught me on the porch as I was leaving. She put a card in my hand, Halverson Law, Estate and Property, and said something I didn't understand until the night of the auction. "Your grandmother put her affairs in order a long time ago, Della. Whatever your family decides to do, you make sure you're standing in the room when they do it. And don't sign one single thing anyone hands you until you've called me first." She held my eyes. She was very particular about that. Don't sign. Ruth died on a Sunday morning in March, with the lavender just coming up and my hand in hers. She wasn't in the ground a full week before the machinery started. My mother, as the eldest, had herself named executor. Uncle Glenn knew a guy, an estate auctioneer, 2 counties over, who could turn the whole farm around in a weekend, contents and acreage both. There was a family meeting at my mother's house. I learned about it from Marcus, after the fact, by text. Mom didn't think you'd want to drive all that way for paperwork stuff. We've got it handled. There'll be a check for you. Then the flyer went up. I found it on the auction company's website at 11 o'clock at night, scrolling on my phone in the dark of my duplex. Estate auction. The Ruth Whitcomb Farm. Real property and contents. Saturday 6 p.m. A photograph of the wraparound porch. A list. Antique dining set. Hand tools. Farm acreage, 38 plus or minus. Farmhouse, 4BR. They were selling all of it. The porch where Ruth and I snapped beans. The kitchen table. The land 4 generations had bled for. And they'd scheduled it for 9 days out. Fast. Before the body was even properly settled, because Uncle Glenn said the market was good and waiting was leaving money on the table. I sat on my couch and looked at that flyer for a long time. Then I picked up Diane Halverson's card off the refrigerator, where it had lived for months, and at 8 the next morning, I called her. Diane's office still smelled of old coffee. She remembered me before I finished my name. "I've been wondering when you'd call," she said, and she pulled a file as thick as a phone book. "Sit down, Della. There's something you need to understand, and we don't have a lot of time before Saturday." She laid it out the way I imagine a surveyor lays out a property line, flat, exact, no room to argue. 2 years before she died, my grandmother had executed a new deed to the farmhouse and the 38 acres. She had transferred the property from her sole name into a joint tenancy. Ruth Whitcomb and Della Crane, joint tenants with right of survivorship, recorded with the county that same week. The day she made me wait in the truck, the paper with the drying stamp, the line beneath hers where she'd pointed and said, "Now you." "Do you understand what that means?" Diane asked. I shook my head. "It means that when your grandmother died, the property did not pass through her estate. It did not pass through her will. It did not become anything your mother, as executor, has any authority over." She folded her hands. "Joint tenancy with right of survivorship means that the instant Ruth died, her share passed automatically, by operation of law, to the surviving joint tenant. To you. As of March, Della, you are the sole owner of that farmhouse and that land. You have been since the morning she passed." The room tilted a little. "Your family," Diane went on, "has scheduled an auction to sell real property they do not own. They can sell the loose contents, the furniture, the tools, those are estate assets, and that's a separate fight. But the house and the land? Your mother can hire all the auctioneers she likes. At the end of the night, a real estate sale doesn't close on a handshake or a gavel. It closes when the owner of record signs the deed at the table." She looked at me over the glasses. "And the owner of record is you. There is exactly one signature on earth that can transfer that land. Yours. And you are not going to give it." I didn't tell them. Diane said not to, and I understood why. If I tipped them off, they'd find another angle, another delay, another way to grind me down until I signed something just to make the noise stop. So I let them keep building. I let my mother send me the time and the address, in case you want to come for the family items. I let Marcus text me about my little cut. I drove out to Whitcomb Road twice that week, alone, while the auction crew tagged Ruth's belongings with numbered stickers. I watched a stranger put a sticker on the rocker my grandfather built. I didn't say a word. I checked the lavender. It needed weeding. I weeded it. The night before, I sat on the porch in the dark until the cold drove me in. I read the deed twice at the kitchen table, the one with the numbered sticker on its leg, and I thought about Ruth's hand pointing at the line beneath hers. "Now you. Now nobody can do to you what they did to my sister." She'd seen this exact night coming. She'd seen it 2 years out, and she'd built me a wall to stand behind, and all I had to do was show up and not sign. I set my alarm. In the morning, I put on my work coat. By 6 that evening, my family was going to find out the land was never theirs to sell. The barn was full when I got there. Folding chairs, maybe 70 people, the smell of kettle corn and diesel. The auctioneer stood on a flatbed trailer with a microphone, running through Ruth's life one numbered lot at a time. My mother sat in the front row in a good coat holding a paddle, beaming like the host of a party. Uncle Glenn worked the crowd. Marcus drank a beer by the door and clapped my shoulder and told me not to make a scene, to sign where Glenn told me and take my cut. I found a folding chair near the back and sat down, hands folded in my lap, and I watched them sell my grandmother's life for nickels on the dollar. The dining table went for $90. The rocker went for 40. Each one landed on me like a small, cold stone, but I didn't move and I didn't speak, because I've learned that silence does more work than anything you can shout in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. Then the auctioneer came to the lot that mattered. All right, folks, the big one. The real property, the farmhouse, and 38 acres on Whitcomb Road. We'll be taking bids subject to closing tonight with the family's closing agent right here. A man in a sport coat with a briefcase stepped up beside the trailer. Let's open the land at $200,000. Do I hear two? The bidding climbed. 210, 230. A developer in the third row and a neighbor with a soybean operation went back and forth until it stalled at $271,000, and the gavel came down, and my mother actually clapped. Sold. Now, we'll just need the executor and the family to step over to the table to sign the transfer, and we'll get this closed tonight. That was when I stood up. I didn't hurry. I walked to the front, past the developer counting out his deposit, and I set Diane Halverson's card on the closing agent's table, and beside it I set a certified copy of the recorded deed. The barn was loud, then it wasn't. Before anyone signs anything, I said, not loudly, you should pull the title on this property. The closing agent picked up the deed. I watched him read it. I watched his face do the thing faces do when the floor moves under them. He looked up at my mother, then at me. Ma'am, who is Della Crane? I am, I said. My mother was on her feet. Della, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself. This property, the closing agent said slowly, reading, is held in joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Ruth Whitcomb and Della Crane. He set the deed down. On the death of one joint tenant, full title passes to the survivor. It doesn't go through the estate. He looked at my mother. Ma'am, you're the executor of the estate. But the estate doesn't own this land. As of the date of death, the sole owner is, he glanced at me, her. The barn was dead silent now. 70 people, the developer with his deposit envelope half open, Uncle Glenn pushing toward the front. Marcus, his beer halfway to his mouth, frozen. That's a mistake, my mother said, but her voice had gone thin. My mother's will leaves everything to be divided. I'm the executor. I have the will right here. A will only distributes what's in the estate, I said. The same words Diane had said to me, in the same flat voice. The land left the estate 2 years ago. Grandma put my name on the deed in October, 2 years back. It's recorded with the county. You can drive over and check it Monday. I looked at her. There's exactly one signature that can sell this land. Mine. And I'm not signing. Uncle Glenn reached the table. You can't do this. We have a buyer. We have a contract. You have a contract to sell something you don't own, I said. I'd talk to your auctioneer about that before he has a bigger problem than I do. The closing agent was already closing his briefcase. I can't close this. I'm sorry. The sale of the real property is void. There's no valid title to transfer. He looked at the developer. Sir, you'll want your deposit back. It was the kettle corn vendor, of all people, who started packing up first, and the rest of the crowd took the cue. They filed out into the dark, murmuring, the way people leave when they can feel a storm building inside somebody else's barn. Within 20 minutes, It was just family. My mother turned on me by the flatbed, her composure gone. After everything this family, do you have any idea what you've done? We had a buyer. $270,000, Della. Split 4 ways. And you what? You want to keep a drafty old farmhouse you can't even afford the taxes on? Grandma wanted me to keep it, I said. She was old. She didn't know what she was signing. She knew exactly what she was signing, I said. She knew 2 years before any of you started measuring the acreage. She told me she didn't want done to me what was done to her sister. I held my mother's eyes. She wasn't confused, Mom. She was just paying attention. It was Lacey who broke the silence. My niece, Marcus's daughter, 17, the one who hovers at the edge of every family gathering with her hood up, stepped out from behind the trailer, where she'd been the whole time. She didn't look at her father or her grandmother. She looked at me. You came every day, she said, her voice wobbling. I stayed out here last summer, 2 weeks, when Mom and Dad were in Florida. You came every single day. You did her hair. You read her the obituaries because she liked to know who'd passed. Lacey swallowed. Nobody else came. Not once. I didn't say anything because I was scared of how it'd go. But I saw you, Aunt Della. I saw you. I crossed to her and took her hand. It was cold and shaking. You were a kid stuck in a hard spot, I said. You're saying it now. That counts more than you know. Can I? She glanced once at her father, then back. Can I come see the lavender sometime? Grandma showed me how to cut it so it dries right. I never forgot. Anytime, I said. I mean that. Anytime at all. If someone you loved ever quietly built you a wall to stand behind something you didn't even understand until you needed it, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. Those are the ones that stay with me. I didn't gloat. There's nothing to win when the prize is a porch and a person to share it with, and one of those is gone for good. My mother threatened to sue. She talked to a lawyer the following week, not Diane, somebody from the city, and the lawyer told her. I heard later through Lacey exactly what Diane had told me. A recorded joint tenancy deed, executed by a competent grantor 2 years before death, is about as airtight as property law gets in this country. Contesting it would cost more than her share of a sale that was never going to happen anyway. She didn't file. The noise died down the way noise does. The contents were a separate matter, and I let those go. The furniture, the tools, the loose estate property that genuinely did belong to all of us. I told my mother to split the auction proceeds from the household items however she liked. I didn't want Ruth's dining table to come back to me as a trophy. But I did drive to the auction company that Monday and buy back 2 things with my own money. My grandfather's rocker for $40 and the dining table for $90. They came home to the farmhouse. They never should have left it. Uncle Glenn's auctioneer, it turned out, had a real problem on his hands. He'd advertised and gavelled the sale of real property without clear title, and the developer's lawyer had things to say about that. None of it was mine to fix, and for the first time in my life, I let a family mess stay unfixed. I moved out to Whitcomb Road that summer. The taxes were a stretch on a medical biller's salary, so I rented out the back, 40 acres to the neighbor with the soybean operation, the one who'd bid that night, and his lease covers the taxes with a little left over. I kept the house. I kept the lavender. I weeded every Saturday morning. On my knees in the dirt, Ruth couldn't kneel in at the end, and Lacey comes most weeks now and cuts it the way her great-grandmother taught her, hanging the bundles upside down in the kitchen to dry. I found a tin box in Ruth's closet that fall, behind the quilt sachets she'd sewn, lavender from these very beds, and a note in her blocky hand. For the house. So it always smells like home. I tucked them in the dresser drawers, every one. So here's what I want to say to you. If you're listening and you feel like the people who are supposed to see you only ever see what you can give them, your worth was never the number they were waiting to divide. The people who measure you in dollars are reading the wrong column entirely. And sometimes the person who truly sees you doesn't make a speech about it, they just quietly put your name where it needs to be. years ahead of the storm, and trust you to show up and stand on it when the time comes. A quiet verdict doesn't have to be loud to be final. That's my story. If it made you feel something anger, or relief, or maybe just a little less alone than it did what I hoped it would. Here's my question for you. If you could protect one thing from the people who only see its price, what would it be? And who would you trust to keep it? Tell me below. I read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next one.